Let's bring in Stephanie Mehta, editor-in-chief of Fast Company, as well as Casey Newton of The Verge. Good morning to you both. Stephanie, I'll start with you. The very question that Josh just raised, does someone need to be in charge of design for Apple to be Apple?
I think that someone does need to be in charge of design for Apple to be Apple, but it doesn't necessarily need to be Jony Ive. I think we've seen Jony move a little bit away from the day-to-day operations at Apple over the course of the last couple of years, and it's really it's clear that his interests lie elsewhere. His interests, as you see from the things that he wants to do at Love From, are designing things. He wants to go back to the classics. And as our senior writer for design, Mark Wilson, pointed out to me in a conversation earlier today, the things that Apple is moving into, augmented reality, self-driving car systems, this is the way that the world is going. This is the world that the world needs, this kind of design leadership. And it's not clear that Jony Ive was the person who was going to give the design world that kind of leadership.
So Casey, maybe it's not clear that Jony Ive is the person that's going to give the design world that type of leadership. Just the fact that Apple is making these transition services is obviously a big part of the narrative moving forward. Still, it all comes back to Apple's hardware and it's computing, right? So how does this play out in terms of the design element within Apple from a managerial standpoint in the future?
Yeah, well, I think that Apple still needs some kind of chief product officer, right? Tim Cook, the CEO, comes from the world of the supply chain. And before Steve Jobs passed away, it was really him, working hand in hand with Jony. They were the chief product officers at Apple. That role has gone missing. And frankly, the design story at Apple hasn't been great over the past couple of years, right? Look at how bad those laptop keyboards have gotten. So I think it's a time for fresh blood at Apple, but I do hope they elevate someone into that chief product role. They need someone with really great taste at the top for Apple to keep being Apple.
Stephanie, are we, or is the market maybe undervaluing his exit? When the news broke, we saw about an $8 billion slide in the stock. It's pretty much come back. But this is a man who arguably has added more value to not only Apple, but maybe to the U.S. stock market, who was not a CEO, than anyone out there.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, I think that $8 billion market decline, if anyone wonders what the value of design is to Apple, that was certainly the market responding and saying, we do put a value on design. We do think that that is part of the market capitalization of a company like Apple. It's really hard to say. I think that, again, Jony Ive was so important to Apple at a certain period of time. And I agree with Casey, they need a chief product officer. They can't, and I agree with Morgan, they can't ignore the hardware. But so much of the design story at Apple and in tech in general, it's really changing. When I talk to our design team, we're not necessarily just talking about product. We're not just talking about hardware or even user interface or software. It's about design thinking. It's about an entire mindset shift.